The National Desk, America's News Now.
Immigration authority remains the center of several legal battles between Texas and the Biden administration. A new ruling from the Supreme Court on the issue. Then federal prosecutors are investigating Facebook and Instagram's alleged role in illegal online drug sales, what the company says it's doing behind the scenes, and the reasons more and more people over the age of 55 are getting divorced and the severe toll it can take on former couples. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Amira David. Tonight, the Supreme Court has cleared the way for the state of Texas to begin enforcing a controversial immigration law. The court had been blocking the law from taking effect up until just yesterday. But now the law allows Texas to arrest, detain, and deport individuals at the border. The Biden administration is seeking to strike the law down, but it can carry out enforcement while litigation continues in the lower courts. One top concern for some local officials right now is how it would impact the U.S. relationship with Mexico.
We have received letters already from our counterparts across the border and from even state officials here saying that this could cause a strain in the relationships, being that it's a #1 trade partner of the U.S.
Texas officials argue the law is needed to protect its safety and security and that it has the right to address the influx of migrants pouring over its state lines. 20 years behind bars for ex-cop Hunter Elward, 17 and a half years for former Deputy Jeffrey Middleton. Those are the first two sentences handed down in the case against the Goon Squad. 6 Mississippi officers in total that will be sentenced for torturing 2 black men and shooting one in the mouth during a raid on their home in January of last year. Now, all 6 of the officers had pleaded guilty to 16 federal charges after Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker said they were beaten, sexually assaulted, and shocked with tasers for 90 minutes while handcuffed during that incident. Here's what the victim's attorney had to say today.
These 2 young men did not ask for the world attention. They never asked to be on the front page. They've never been in front of cameras, and they've undergone, from what you heard in there, a substantial amount of trauma.
The sentencing follows a sprawling investigation done last fall by the New York Times and Mississippi Today that revealed a pattern of behavior in which for nearly 2 decades, deputies in the Rankin County Sheriff's Department barged into homes in the middle of the night, handcuffed, and then tortured residents for information or confessions. They were called the Goon Squad because of their willingness to use excessive force and not report it. 4 additional officers stand to be sentenced in the next couple of days. Today is primary day in some key states. Right now, voters in Arizona, Florida, Illinois, and Ohio are heading to the polls. In Ohio, Republicans are looking at a fierce finish as 3 GOP candidates duke it out to become the Senate nominee who will run against Senator Sherrod Brown in November. In California, voters are deciding on a replacement for former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. President Biden and Trump will be on several ballots, but are already, of course, the presumptive nominees. Right now, Meta, parent company of Facebook and Instagram, is under investigation by federal prosecutors in Virginia over what role the company may be playing in the sale of illegal drugs on its platforms. National correspondent Atra Al-Nashar takes a closer look.
Drug trafficking these days is often done by the tap of a touchscreen. Dealers and buyers turning to apps like Snapchat, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. The DEA says using emoji codes for cocaine, heroin, Adderall, Percocet, and oxycodone. Then pay on another app like Venmo or Zelle. The DEA also says those sales are directly connected to overdose deaths.
Remember that no legitimate medication can be purchased on social media.
The Wall Street Journal, first to report, federal prosecutors in Virginia are investigating whether Meta's platforms facilitate and profit from those drug sales. Meta tells us the sale of illicit drugs is against our policies and we work to find and remove the content from our services. Meta proactively cooperates with law enforcement authorities to help combat the sale and distribution of illicit drugs. In 2020, Congress set up a commission to combat synthetic opioid trafficking. Researchers like David Luckey proved how accessible these drugs are when they searched common terms on various platforms.
We found that it was extremely simple and easy and inexpensive. The sites themselves have to self-monitor. If they're not able or willing to self-monitor, then regulations need to be put in place so that others can monitor them.
Drug sales are not the only illegal activity on Meta's platforms under scrutiny. In a lawsuit filed late last year, New Mexico's Attorney General accuses the company of funneling likely victims of sexual exploitation, often children, to potential predators. On this issue, Meta also points to its cooperation with law enforcement, information sharing with other companies, and work with child safety experts to root out predators. Congress also has a lot of catching up to do when it comes to filling in the regulatory gaps to crack down on dangerous activity on social media. Now, in just the past 14 months, dozens of bills to do that have been introduced. But so far, just a small handful have been brought up for a vote. On Capitol Hill, I'm Atrel Nashar.
Atra, thank you. Abortions in the U.S. have reached the highest level seen in over a decade, despite multiple state bans in place across the country. A new report by the Gutmaker Institute found more than 1 million people had abortions in the year 2023. That's a 10% increase from the year 2020. Abortions are prohibited in at least 14 states, and states without abortion bans saw a 25% increase from 2020 to 2023. Today, former White House trade advisor Peter Navarro reported to a federal prison in Miami to begin serving a 4-month sentence. It comes after the Supreme Court rejected his bid to stay out of prison while he appeals his conviction for contempt of Congress. Navarro was convicted last year for refusing to comply with a subpoena from the House committee investigating the Capitol Hill riot. And with less than a week left, time is running out for former President Trump to come up with more than $450 million. It's a bond he needs to post so he can appeal a civil fraud judgment he's facing in New York, as he now also runs for president. National correspondent Christine Frizzell with more.
How can you run for election if you're sitting in a courthouse?
His anger is palpable. Former President Donald Trump running out of options, calling the ruling in his New York civil fraud case a witch hunt and election interference.
And that's why we must do everything in our power.
But in a matter of days, New York Attorney General Letitia James may be able to start seizing his assets, including Trump Tower, if he doesn't put up the cash. $454 million by March 25th. More than 30 bond companies have already denied him the money. It's a fine some legal experts say violates the 8th Amendment of the Constitution.
The amount is extremely excessive. It violates the cruel and unusual punishment provisions of the Constitution that include excessive fines as being prohibited. There was no damage done here. The judge just made up this figure.
Constitutional law professor Alan Dershowitz warns the impact could be a chilling effect on others.
You can't deny somebody the right to appeal based on lack of funds. That's a violation of equal protection and a violation of due process.
Some have also called the case politically motivated, since Attorney General Letitia James ran on the promise of going after Trump.
I look forward to going into the office of Attorney General every day, suing him.
I say one name, Donald Trump.
Will you sue him for us?
Oh, we're going to definitely sue him. We're going to be a real pain in the ass.
But in the civil fraud case, the judge concluded Trump and his associates engaged in a years-long conspiracy to deceive banks and insurers by inflating the value of his properties and the size of his wealth, took no responsibility, and showed no remorse.
Donald Trump falsely, knowingly, inflated his net worth by billions of dollars to unjustly enrich himself, his family, and to cheat the system.
This week, Donald Trump's lawyers called the difficulties in obtaining this money insurmountable. He was able to secure a more than $90 million bond to guarantee a defamation judgment he owes to writer E. Jean Carroll in a separate case. In Washington, I'm Christine Frizzell.
Christine, thank you. New information about missing University of Missouri student Riley Strain, who disappeared in Nashville. Police have released body cam video of a brief encounter between an officer and Riley the night he disappeared. Take a listen.
How you doing, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
A short interaction there. The officer talked to Riley about a block away from the bar that he was asked to leave, and says he didn't seem to be distressed at that time, although multiple eyewitnesses say Strain was heavily intoxicated. The 22-year-old has been missing for more than a week. Coming up, sales of electric vehicles have been declining. The battle the Biden administration faces while trying to turn the trend around. Then divorce rates for older Americans have surged in recent years. The impact it's having on financial stability and health. And later, residents in Ohio share how a devastating tornado has impacted their lives as the community works to clean up the damage. Stay with us. Right now, President Biden on the campaign trail with a stop in Nevada. This as his administration gears up to make a splash in the auto world with new gas vehicle standards that are set to be released this week that would punish gas-powered vehicles and pave the way for more electric technology. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins has more.
The Biden administration is reportedly preparing to roll out the toughest limits on pollution for cars and light trucks.
I'm cutting our carbon emissions in half by 2030.
As the EPA finalizes new emission regulations, officials at the EPA claim this will accelerate the country's transition to EVs. The White House saying the effort will reduce American oil imports by around 20 billion barrels. But the announcement comes amid plateauing demand for EVs in the U.S.
This is a decision that is completely disconnected from where the American public is right now.
Ford and General Motors cutting production of their electric vehicles, Tesla slashing prices. Critics worry America doesn't have the energy infrastructure in place to handle mass amounts of drivers ditching gas-powered cars for electric.
Right now, for most Americans, they don't have access to a charging station, and they want to be able to drive the car that suits their family's needs.
Range anxiety, still a concern for many. In 2021, Congress authorized $7.5 billion to build 500,000 public charging stations across the country. As of last December, none were built. In January, the rental car company Hertz began selling off 20,000 electric vehicles from its fleet. The company saying the vehicles were expensive to repair and people didn't want to rent them. This past week, the Hertz CEO responsible for the EV push stepping down.
Unfortunately, this fast race to force Americans into cars that they don't want, I think is going to be rejected at the ballot box if they're not careful.
The new EPA standards for cars and trucks is slated to take effect in 2027. The EPA already mandated half of all vehicles sold in the U.S. must be electric by 2030. I'm Kayla Gaskins reporting.
Donald Trump facing backlash for inflammatory remarks he made last night regarding Jewish voters.
A Jewish person that votes for Democrats hates their religion, they hate everything about Israel, and they should be ashamed of themselves because Israel will be destroyed.
The presumptive GOP nominee and former president claims Democrats, namely Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, are calling for an overthrow of Netanyahu's government for votes. A White House spokesperson calls the comments vile and unhinged anti-Semitic rhetoric. The vast majority of Jewish Americans do identify as Democrats.
And he's conveying this message of contempt and anger toward Jewish Americans because he knows that 3/4 of us will never support him.
New tonight, a block on arms exports to Israel from Canada. Foreign Minister Melanie Joly announcing this decision after the Canadian Parliament passed a resolution that toughens Canada's stance on the war in Gaza that has gone on now for more than 5 months. It comes amidst increasing global pressure on Israel to minimize the loss of civilian life and up the amount of aid allowed in to rectify what is now turned into a humanitarian catastrophe. Some Jewish groups argue the move will undermine Israel's right to defend itself against Hamas, which is still holding over 100 Israeli civilians hostage. This, as we learn, an Israeli delegation has left Qatar after 1 day of indirect talks with no breakthrough in a ceasefire hostage deal. U.S. and Israeli officials are expected to meet in Washington early next week to ease a growing rift between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu, as the U.S. has warned Israel not to launch another offensive that could compromise the lives of thousands on the ground in Gaza.
The United States will not let Ukraine fail. This coalition will not let Ukraine fail, and the free world will not let Ukraine fail.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin reaffirming support for Ukraine today at a meeting with world leaders in Germany. U.S. defense officials funded a new package of military aid last week with $300 million in contract savings using weapons and equipment from Pentagon stocks. A $95 billion bill with around $60 billion in Ukraine aid has been stalled in Congress for months. And Congress has reached a deal to fund the government through the rest of the fiscal year as the weekend deadline approaches. Money for the Department of Homeland Security had been holding up talks. Lawmakers are working to finalize the text so it can go before the full House and Senate. They need to vote on it before midnight on Friday to pass the bill in time. The Federal Reserve is still working to combat inflation as they begin their 2-day policy meeting. The bankers are likely to keep interest rates unchanged, and we could get more information about how many rate cuts to expect this year. Inflation has remained high, so some economists believe officials could reduce their rate cut expectations to just 2 this year instead of 3. And new home construction sales that surged to nearly 11% last month. That's according to new government data. That could lead to less expensive prices. The increase followed several months of high demand and low inventory. Builders are expecting demand to stay elevated. Mortgage rates are also falling, but they're still high. New research on divorce later in life shows it is costly, both emotionally and financially. Medical reporter Liz Bonis shares what counselors say may help in the healing.
Hey there, hello to you. The Great Divorce is a term that comes from the American Association of Retired Persons, or AARP, to define divorces involving individuals ages 50 and older. The rates for it have doubled in recent decades, and we're just starting to learn more about its emotional impacts.
Nobody is quite sure why these divorces are happening and if that emotional impact is lifelong. But Betsy Linnell, an assistant professor of psychology and clinical counselor at Ohio's Cedarville University, says, well, some of it may be a greater acceptance of divorce.
There's also just more brokenness in our world, unfortunately.
That brokenness has led to a jump from 5 in 1,000 marriages to 12 in 1,000 in the most recent numbers available of gray divorce. The financial cost is also high. A man can expect his standard of living to drop about 20%, a woman more than 40%. That alone can impact depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems.
So what do you see in couples that split up after a long marriage?
Even individuals that are separating because of infidelity or abuse, there are just situations in which they have a harder time adjusting, realizing I'm going to be without this person, and that grief that is normal in any separation is increased because of the years of memory.
So isn't there an initial bump in happiness in those who find love again?
Almost a quarter of those individuals that do go through a divorce in later life actually end up in a new relationship within 10 years. And we have not yet seen the statistics on whether those relationships make it or whether they are rebound relationships. We don't have that data yet.
Betsy says aside from the financial hardship, health problems that often arrive later in life, and even the change in a relationship with adult children can all impact happiness following a gray divorce.
Coming up, what happened after a gun was found inside a child's lunchbox at a daycare in West Palm Beach. We'll be right back. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering the issues that matter to you. We're taking the pulse of America.
According to a Riviera Beach police report, a teacher at Jackson's daycare was opening up a kid's lunchbox when they saw a gun inside. She then screamed, "Gun!" and another teacher came to help and see if it was real. And it was. That's when they called police. And when officers arrived, they found a 9mm Glock 43 handgun. The boy's mom, 39-year-old Shanae Davis, told police that she normally keeps the gun in her glove box. But lately, her apartment complex has seen several break-ins, so she's been taking the gun inside. On Thursday, she placed the gun inside her son's lunchbox because she doesn't carry a purse, but she forgot to take it out. Parents say while having a gun is a safety precaution, incidents like this are a reminder of how important it is to keep these weapons away from children.
Reality setting in for some in Russell's Point.
I've lived in this county my whole life. Never seen nothing like this. Been a couple little ones, but nothing like this one. This was bad.
We met Doug and Phil last week, just hours after tragedy hit.
I felt amazed that you found us again. I couldn't believe it.
The pair, close neighbors, saying their homes suffered minor damage, but they know that many lost everything and some didn't make it out alive. Doug says watching community come to life has been overwhelming.
I have no other word for it.
There is more work going on our roads.
According to the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, in the last 5 years, there were 49 fatalities in work zones in the state. 7 of these were construction workers.
A camera would then take a photograph of the rear of your vehicle.
Representative John Blanton is the sponsor of House Bill 192 that would install cameras in work zones, along with signs indicating the cameras are in place. Citations would be issued to those caught speeding. The purpose is to make work zones safer by slowing drivers down. The first violation would be a $75 fine. Additional violations in a 3-year period would be $125.
Hey, I don't think it's too big of an issue to keep everybody safe. I work in construction, so, the guys out there working and stuff, it can get dangerous if people are speeding.
Coming up, another edited royal photo from Princess Kate, now fueling more speculation about her whereabouts and secrecy within the royal family. We will explain the controversy right after this. Yet another doctored royal photo helping conspiracy theories rage on. Getty Images has flagged a photo taken by Princess Catherine of Wales of Queen Elizabeth II with her many great-grandchildren, determining that picture had been edited. It comes after Princess Kate admitted last week to altering a photo of her and her kids. Rumors have been swirling about Kate's whereabouts and what the palace may be hiding about her purported treatment for abdominal surgery in January. And if you're feeling lucky, listen up. The Mega Millions jackpot is mighty large tonight. $893 million up for grabs in tonight's drawing after no tickets matched all 6 numbers on Friday night. Wednesday night's Powerball jackpot, a separate jackpot, also climbing right now, reaching $687 million. The take-home pay, of course, not quite as much, but you do still make enough to call yourself a multimillionaire, so that's never bad, right? Best of luck if you plan on playing. That does it for this edition of the National Desk. We do invite you to join us again for more coverage of America's top stories tonight. Just check your local listings. I'm Amira David, and thank you so much for watching.